All right, good morning, everyone. Brian Post here. Welcome back for session 6. This morning, we are going to continue talking about trauma. And this time, we are going to be moving a little bit more into the state levels of memory, understanding the impact, looking at some of the traumatic experiences themselves and kind of the impact that they have on the adopted child, and then just kind of be working on pulling that all together. But I thought I'd tell you all a little funny story that I was telling my wife this morning. The other day, my desk faces a window, so I just kind of gaze out on the terrain, and I saw this little bird building a nest. And so I was kind of watching it through the day, and I think I happened to be walking outside, and I noticed the bird had gotten a little strip of plastic from somewhere and put it up in the nest. And I thought, you know what, Mr. Bird, that's probably, or Mrs. Bird in this instance, that's probably not the best, thing to use for your nest. And so a couple weeks passed, and I guess the bird had laid the eggs. And one day my wife and my son said, you know, Donnie found a little egg outside, and he was wanting to put it in an incubator. So it didn't strike me at that moment that it may have been an egg from the nest, but so I didn't think anything about it. And then the other day I walked out, and beside my Suburban, because the nest is kind of in the corner of the it's not really a garage, it's kind of the sound. What do you call that thing? Gosh, it's a thing you park your cars under, but it's not really a garage. It was up in the corner of that, so it's all exposed to the outside. And 2 of the little eggs had fallen down on the ground and obviously, burst, and, the little half-developed little bird fetuses were there. And I thought, wow, and I noticed that the bottom of the nest had fallen out. And I thought, oh my gosh, that poor mama bird didn't understand how to build a strong nest. And because that is such an innate ability for birds. I mean, it is no different than parenting. We have an innate ability for parenting, and when our development goes awry at very early stages, then it throws everything off. And so I kind of jokingly said to my wife, I wonder if that mama had been raised in foster care, or if she had some kind of early trauma history. Or my wife said, yeah, maybe she was a little brain damaged. But, any of those things are quite possible, because it's just not often that a bird is not able to build a complete nest for the raising of their offspring. And sure enough, the mama bird is gone. She's nowhere around. So I thought, that is just a little fascinating exposure to nature, and how things in nature, whether you're a bird or whether you're a human, they can just go awry at any given moment. So just thought I'd share that with you guys this morning. The other thing I want to do before we jump into the trauma stuff is I want to talk a little bit about the bonus question from session 5. And the bonus question was something to the effect that parents have to create opportunities. And it was blank opportunities. They have to be able to create blank opportunities. And so let me see if I can find that real quick. Give me just a moment, because I think it's pretty important. Well, in fact, I know it is. Oh, let's see what up here. Scroll down to number 5. There we are. The bonus question. Right here. When parenting children, through their trauma histories, it is critical that parents create blank opportunities. When parenting children through their trauma histories, it is critical that parents create blank opportunities. Now, I received all kinds of really good answers. I mean, bonding, attachment, healing, but positive. And sometimes there was it was like the rapid fire, 1, 2, 3, healing, therapeutic, bonding. It's like you just got them all in there all at one time. And then I got a couple that were spot on. And the answer is, when parenting children through their trauma histories, it is critical that parents create oxytocin opportunities. And I want to talk about why that is important. Creating an oxytocin opportunity is different than creating a bonding opportunity, attachment opportunity, a positive opportunity, a healing opportunity, a therapeutic opportunity, because all of those are behaviors. All of those are outcomes. The oxytocin opportunity is the process that leads to the outcome. Alan Shore says the core of the self is unconscious and nonverbal and lies in patterns of affect regulation. The core of the self, and I think I've shared this in a past session, the core of the self is unconscious and nonverbal and lies in patterns of affect regulation. Let me write that down for you. So Alan Shore, well, wouldn't you know, my pen's not working. It's working, but it's not working. You guys are probably thinking, oh my gosh, this guy and his technology. You really see, everything's working except my pen. So I wonder what the deal is. I love all these amazing opportunities for regulating. Everything is an opportunity for regulating. Every interaction that we encounter is an opportunity for our regulation. And I think we forget that the opportunities that we encounter, in life are opportunities for our own regulation. And we oftentimes want to focus on the other person. We want to focus on what the other person is doing. We want to focus on their behavior. We want to focus on the fact that they're not doing the things that we think they should be doing. I have no idea why this pen is not working. But really, it's just opportunities for our own behavior. Huh. Well, it's working in every way except this one. Well, interesting. Hey, there we go. See what a little persistence will do for you? You don't have to get so freaked out about things. If you can just stay focused long enough to realize in the moment you are not going to die, it's just the worst thing that could possibly happen, which would be dying, is just simply it's not going to happen. So when you can just stay focused long enough and be persistent, things happen. I was talking to one of our members the other day, and I was just saying, you know, you have to look for change in the small areas. You cannot be focused on these great big breakthrough moments, because those great big breakthrough moments, typically when they do happen, you don't even recognize that they're happening. I remember I was working with a family some years back in San Diego, and they had a 16-year-old son who they said was out of control, and he was defiant and all these other, he had some challenges. And they said how he wouldn't connect. You know, he wasn't interested in connecting with the family. And I remember at dinner sitting there and observing the son was telling the dad a story, and he was looking straight at the dad. I mean, he was really engaged, looking straight at the dad. And guess where the dad was looking? Down at his plate. He was completely disconnected. So we miss we really miss the accumulation of the breakthrough moments when they occur, because oftentimes we just don't pay attention. We don't see them. It's just not within our awareness, and so we get so hyper focused on these great big breakthrough moments that we miss those small moments that really go into creating those great big outcomes. So Alan Shore says the core of the self is unconscious and nonverbal, and lies in patterns of affect regulation. And if you all would like for me to start sending you the PowerPoint itself that I use, I'm happy to do that. It wouldn't have the drawings and the writings that I end up using, so there are a lot of just like single sentence slides. But if you feel like that would be valuable for you, just shoot me a little note. I'm happy to send it to you. You can keep track of it. And we are actually I'm having all of these transcribed, so I'm pulling them all together, just figuring out what's the best. You know, do you want me to send them to you as I get them, or would you like for me to put them all together at the end of the course and send it to you then? So any feedback you want to provide to me for that is very valuable. Let's just see what we got here. We got a message. Okay, yes, please do. I sure will. I will start sending those to you all. Typically, I will send them even before the class. I try to have them. I try to have them done obviously before the class, and I'll send them over to you so you can have them. And then the transcribed versions that I receive, once I get those done, I'll send those to you as they come in. They usually come in within about a week, so I've got several already that I'll send you. I'm not sure that I had number 5 done. I think I did, so I think we're probably pretty much current. But I'll send you those as well so that you'll have them. Let me just take another look here. Since we're just enjoying one another's company, let's see. No, I guess not. Let's see. Where am I storing those at? Alright, I've got those somewhere. All right, I'll get them to you. So now that we know that, we're good to go. I'll get those to you, and we'll get back to business. All right. So Alan Shore says, the core of the self is unconscious and nonverbal and lies in patterns of affect regulation. So getting back to our question about the opportunities, the answer is the oxytocin opportunity. It is not, and this is the way I translate Alan Shore's statement here about the core of the self. It is not what you say or do, but how you feel when you are saying and doing it. That's very important. In fact, you should write both of those down. I mean, that's like index card worthy. Both of those statements. And you just see how I take, Alan Shore, who is a neuroscientist, and I just make his stuff layperson. I mean, it's so simple, to just say, it's not what you say or do. It's not what I say. It's not what I do. It's how I feel when I am saying and doing it. That makes all the difference. And how you feel is the dynamic that you create for the oxytocin. That's the big component with that. Hang on just a moment. My daughter's calling me. Hey, honey.
Hey, Dad.
What's up?
Well, you said something about, you said that we need to find the papers so that he can add me to the something so that if something happens to the house, it will go straight to me. Something happens to him, it will go straight to me.
Oh well, he's just confused.
What do I supposed to say?
Oh, just tell him you've got an attorney working on it. And if he needs to call me, tell him to call me. All right? All right, I'm doing a webinar, so I can call you back later if you need me to. Okay, bye-bye. Family issues, family issues. How nice of me to include you all in all of that. Okay, so the oxytocin occurs when you are feeling how you're feeling. It's the difference between oxytocin and cortisol. You can be doing any behavior. You can be doing what is in a book called an attachment behavior. You can be doing what in a lecture is called a bonding behavior. You can be doing what you believe in that moment is creating a therapeutic environment, a therapeutic opportunity. When Dad's sitting down at the dinner table, I mean, that sitting at the dinner table is therapeutic. I mean, that is considered to be a family dinner, research says, is one of the primary things that leads to higher intelligence in children. So that could be considered a therapeutic opportunity, especially when the family is dealing with a difficult child. However, if Dad is completely emotionally disconnected, if he is completely emotionally absent, guess what? No oxytocin is getting created in the relationship exchange that would actually go into making that a therapeutic opportunity. So the nuance, and this is, I get so far into these nuances, and I want you all to get into them too, because I believe this is what really creates the in-depth, not the in-depth, but the depth of your understanding of this model, which is vastly different than what other people will have, even professionals, because it's the nuances that make the difference. And so when you get into looking at how am I feeling in this moment, am I actually connecting in this moment, am I actually feeling good in this moment, am I actually creating an oxytocin opportunity, or in this moment, am I completely disconnected? Am I stressed out? Do I really not want to be here? Would I really rather be doing something else? Then that's when you have to be able to say, look, if you're in that space, let me take a step back because I'm trying to, I want to create something positive here and I'm not feeling positive. So you got to move yourself into that direction of creating those oxytocin opportunities. So I want you to really think on that. All righty, now let's get on into our day. I turn on my trusty little pin off now that I've got it going. Bam. Shrink that there. All right. If all we do is focus, now look at this. Now I can't erase my drawings. That's funny. So interesting. I guess I'll have to start using this thing here at the bottom. All right. If all we do is focus and become consumed with diminishing, reducing, changing, controlling, and suppressing the behavior, what we're going to be doing is ignoring everything underneath it. See, that's where we miss the oxytocin opportunity. I mean, when we and why do we do that? So why do we become focused, consumed with diminishing, reducing, changing, controlling, and suppressing behavior? Why do we do that? This is going to be a quiz question. What part of our brain makes us become consumed? What part of our brain leads us to focus on, obsess on reducing, suppressing, controlling, changing behavior? What part of our brain causes us to do that? The amygdala. Why? Because the amygdala only sees threat. The amygdala is all emotional. I want you to get that. I want you to have that. I want that to be a foundation of your life. Not that it like always, makes you capable of being the most regulated person in the world in any given situation, because that's just not true. But I want you to always have that foundation to return to, because stress is a two-way street. I mean, attachment is a two-way street. You have to have stress, but you also have to have joy. I'll give you a prime example of that. Myself and Marley, my 10-year-old, and Donnie, my other 10-year-old, we were out yesterday. We came home. We relaxed for a little bit. We went out yesterday. We went down to a car lot because I want to look at a minivan, because I have a Suburban right now. And because Marley's in a wheelchair, I have to pick her up and put her in the Suburban. And I'm thinking about going to a minivan because it's lower and it's easier to transition her into the minivan. So we go to the car lot, we're walking around, and I know Donnie's really excited, but the car salesman comes up and Donnie's talking, and I'm stressed. I'm like, Donnie, you have to stop. I'm trying to have a conversation with this guy. And it just kind of, there were just various little things, and I would continue to feel stressed. And finally I said, look, you're going to go sit in the Suburban, because I need to talk to this man about this vehicle. He's not here to talk to you. He's here to talk to me. Now, that is not the most regulated thing in the world. I mean, it just isn't. But that's just stress, because that's just normal. That's just a part of our everyday. It's just a part of who we are. Now, later, when we left the car lot, I said to Donnie, I said, look, son, when I go to a place where I'm conducting business and when you're with me, I just need you to be quiet, because I'm conducting business. And he said, well, what part of buying a car is business? I said, anytime you go to someone else's business and you're thinking about buying something from them, that's conducting business. See, he's just asking. He's not being, a smart butt or anything. He's just asking. And he said, oh, okay. I said, and that's why it's very important for you just to listen and be involved and participate. But he's not there. We're not there for you to talk to him. He's not there to talk to you. He's there to talk to me. And so we got it. So then I'm able to, after I create stress in the relationship, I'm able to repair it. And a little while later, we wrestle and we're having fun and we move on. Well, that's how you create secure attachment. By having those stressful moments followed by those reparative moments. You have to have those in every situation. Okay, let's get on into this whole trauma thing a little bit further. Okay, there are 4 levels of memory. We didn't get into this last week in our last session. I want you to be intimately aware of these 4 levels of memory because they're all extremely important. The first level of memory is the cognitive level of memory. And then after that, we have the emotional level of memory, we have the motor level of memory, and then we have the state level of memory. I look at all of these like a filing cabinet. Your cognitive level of memory, that's your top level of memory. That's where you spend most of your time every day. Or at least you think you do. Because that's your thinking, that's your talking, that's your interacting and you're engaging. You know, that's where you're recalling facts and data. Marley and I went to the museum yesterday because last time, a couple weeks ago when we went, it was on a Tuesday and it was closed. So yesterday was a Friday, so we knew it wasn't Tuesday. See, we're recalling facts, so we know there's a special exhibit. I mean, we saw Picasso and Cervantes, and I mean, we saw some amazing artwork, but we recalled the fact that it was closed on Tuesday, and I'll never forget again that the museum is closed on Tuesday by that one experience. But that's a cognitive memory. So it's always consciously available. I can tap into that a significant period of time. However, what we need to understand is that we're really operating out of our cognitive memory. I mean, probably, gosh, what is the research on that? That we're actually only cognitive. We think we're cognitive, the majority of the time, but in reality, we're only cognitive like 10% of the time. I mean, after that, we go down to our emotional level of memory. So let's talk about that for a minute. Your emotional level of memory, that's the level of memory where you store all emotions. That's where all experiences are stored. It's beyond the cognitive, and it's connected to an energy. So all memories, all experiences, whether they're cognitive or whether they are emotional, they have an emotional memory attached to them. So that's why you may not always remember a person's face. You may not always remember a particular place, but you'll have a corresponding emotion attached to it. So a far majority of the time, we are operating not out of our cognitive, but we're operating out of our emotional. Our emotional memories are dictating our thinking. Our emotional memories are dictating our behaviors and our actions. And so just like yesterday, to stick with the same example, at the car dealership, I know a part of my stress was the emotional memory being elicited from when I was a child and we would go into places like that. The energy changes. So you automatically, just because of the environment, you're in a more stressful state of being. So there's an emotional memory. I mean, it's associated with money. It's associated with things that you experienced as a child related to money. It's associated with change. It's associated with, life transition. So all those things create stress. So we all have an emotional memory attached to every memory that we ever experienced. And then after our emotional memory, we have our motor memory. Now this is your walking, your talking, your writing. Now this is all done at an unconscious level. When you get to your emotional memory, you start to drop further down in your consciousness. So you start here at your cognitive, you get to your emotional, you drop a little further down in your unconscious. So, cognitively, you're probably unconscious 90% of the time. And then you drop down to your emotional memory, so you're dropping down another 95% of the time. You drop down to your motor memory, that's another 98% of the time. You are not conscious. This is not conscious. When you're walking and you're talking, you're writing, you're folding clothes, you're cooking food, 98% of the time, you're not conscious. You're just going off of motor memory. And it's just automatic. You get in your car, you drive, and see, this is really where mindfulness, all of these levels, this is where mindfulness comes in. Because the moment you can slow down and you can pay attention to what you're doing, as soon as you pay attention to your walking, you go from being 98% unconscious to 98% conscious. And see, that changes everything. Then you come up here, you're 95% conscious. You come up here, you're 90% conscious. See the difference between the two as opposed to being unconscious versus conscious? See, just when you can stop and you can be a little bit mindful, the world changes. It truly changes. All of a sudden, you're paying attention to the road. You're paying attention to the car. You're paying attention to your circumstances. You're paying attention to your breathing. You're paying attention to the grass. You're paying attention to the trees. You're paying attention when you're walking. You're paying attention to your joints, to your toes, to the pat of your feet against the ground, the feel of your shoes, the pace of your heart, the muscles in your thighs, in your hips. You're paying attention to your arms moving. See, when you're thinking, you're paying attention to what it is I'm thinking right now. Oh my gosh, I'm really wishing my child would stop talking. Why is that important that he stopped talking? What is that really about for me? Let me calm myself down. Let me take a few deep breaths. Let me settle into this moment. Let me check in with him and find out what's going on with him. I know he's really excited. How can I develop more awareness in this moment? See, that's mindfulness. That's the power of mindfulness. That's huge. That's huge. See, all of this, the motor memory is vastly unconscious. 98% of the time, it's unconscious. And so what do we have after the motor memory? We have the state level memory. Our earliest memories are at the state level memories. This are associated with your personality traits, where you store your personality. So your very earliest core from the time you are conceived, for your first 5 years, stored at the state level memory. So all those experiences are stored at state level memory. The moment you become stressed, up here, if we create a little graph of our brain, the moment you become stressed, your state level memory gets activated, and your state level memory drives all these other levels of memory. See, this is where your childhood is stored. Your state level memory is 100% of the time, it's unconscious. 100% of the time, it's unconscious. But you know what you have to do? The only thing you have to do to make your state level of memory conscious is you just have to breathe. If you breathe, your state level memory becomes conscious, 100% conscious, just like what I just told you. If I take just a moment and connect with myself, I connect to my childhood experiences around buying a new car. I connect to the stress that was oftentimes circulating in my home around buying a new car, how that affects the other bills, how that affects the transition of the family. There's excitement, but there's also anxiety. See, all that's tied into the state level memory. See, the state level's all unconscious. And the thing is, the state level of memory dictates all the other levels of memory. So if you've experienced trauma at your state level memory, as soon as it gets activated, guess what comes out? Bam! Your trauma gets activated, and it drives all your other levels of memory. So when you've experienced trauma not only experienced trauma in the first years of your life, the first 5 years of your life, but when you've experienced trauma at any stage in your life, trauma, because of the stress, because it is so overwhelming, it gets stored at the state level memory. And as we talked about this in our last session, if trauma is stored in a fragmented, incoherent manner, It gets stored in the state level memory throughout your whole body. Okay, so this is why when you're working with an adopted child and they get triggered about anything. You may not know. Remember, we can get triggered through any of our sensory pathways. Just a little refresher here. You can get triggered through what you see, what you smell, what you hear, what you taste, what you touch, temperature, movement, and digestion. Any of these things, any of these pathways can trigger your stress, can trigger your state level memory. And if those memories are fragmented and incoherent, if they have not been processed, expressed, and understood, that's the difference between your trauma being a short-term stressful experience versus a long-term traumatic experience. That's the difference. So then it gets stored at your state level of memory, and states become traits of your personality. So these states that occur become traits of your personality. So when we're talking about trauma, 90% of what we're talking about occurs at a state level. When you're talking about, and remember, that is unconscious. That is unconscious. Your adopted child is not consciously aware, and this is what we have such a difficult time grasping. They're not consciously aware that this is something. They're not thinking about this. They're not thinking about the trauma that they have experienced and how that's dictating their behavior. And we're not thinking about it as parents, as professionals. We're not thinking about it either. So we have to understand that trauma becomes states. And states, Bruce Perry says, states become traits of your personality. So your states make the traits of who you are. And when that occurs, when your state level memory gets activated, it drives your motor memory. It drives your behavior. I mean, that's a breakthrough. Your state level drives your behavior. Bam, that's a breakthrough right there. Trauma is driving your child's behavior. The trauma, the stress is driving your child's behavior. So you get that. Then you can take a step back. And you can say, this is not about me. Not only is this not about me, this is not about my child. See, that becomes big. Let's pause for a moment. Let's just pause for a moment. Stop reading the slide. We're pausing. We're pausing. Pause your thinking. I want you to focus on what I'm saying. Focus on what I'm saying. Okay? And especially don't be trying to write the slide down. Okay, so focus on what I'm saying here. Trauma is stored at the state level. And states become traits of your personality. When your child's state level, which is where their trauma is stored, when it gets activated, it drives, it dictates, it communicates the motor, which is the behavior. And then that further drives and communicates and dictates to the emotion. Oh my gosh, what your child is feeling. Oh my gosh. if I have experienced trauma and that gets stirred up and triggered from seemingly the least stressful event, bam! I mean, oh my God, it's dictating my feelings. Tell me, how can I feel calm? Tell me, how can I feel peaceful? Tell me, how can I feel regulated and loving when I'm feeling like in that moment I'm gonna die? I cannot. And then my thinking. Oh, it's almost painful just writing it. I have to put my pen down. It's just painful. Ugh. And the way we get so wrapped up in our children's behaviors, the way we get so wrapped up, remember the emotional pathways of behavior. The emotional pathways of behavior, attitudes, feelings, behavior, and how challenged we are with emotions and our cognitive, our thinking. See, it's all wrapped in. It's all tied together. I hope you're feeling me. I hope you're getting me. I hope you're smelling what I'm cooking. That's all I'm saying. I hope you're smelling what I'm cooking, because this is powerful stuff. And when you can get it, when you can grasp it, when you can grasp the nuances from the bottom up, from the foundation, it transforms everything. It transforms everything. So a key point in addressing trauma in children, if we really want to address the child's trauma, and if we really want to create an opportunity for healing, then we've got to address the child at the emotional, at the state, at the nonverbal level. Nonverbal. We've got to address them through our eye contact. See, this is where the oxytocin's coming in. Through the eye contact. We've got to address them through the tone of voice, through the gesture, through the posture. All of these become critical in the nonverbal experience, because this is creating the foundation for the oxytocin experience. See, I cannot address my child in the moment of my stress. I cannot create a healing opportunity in the moment of my stress. I cannot create an attachment opportunity. I cannot create an educational opportunity. Why can I not create an educational opportunity in the midst of my stress? Tell me that. I want you to tell me from the scientific perspective. I want you to be able to tell me that I cannot create an educational moment in the midst of my own stress and in the midst of my child's stress, because stress causes confused and distorted thinking, You should be filling in this blank. You should be telling me what's coming next. Stress causes confusion, distorted thinking, and suppresses the short-term memory. Right? That's why I can't create a teaching opportunity in that moment. That's why I have to do the best that I can to contend with my own stress. That's why I have to say to my child, look, you've got to move away, because I am too stressed out to be able to deal with you in this situation. So you need to go wait. You're going to just have to wait, because otherwise I'm going to get really ugly, and I don't want to get really ugly. I don't want to get really ugly, so I'm doing you a favor. I'm doing me a favor. And then when I can finish what I'm doing, I can come back, and then when I've calmed down and I've regulated myself, then I can create a teaching opportunity that's non-stressful, that's oxytocin-rich, and that will last. It may require a little repetition, and that's okay, because, see, we have a good opportunity. Every time you have an experience, every single time, it is an opportunity to learn. Every single time. So when you are addressing your child, and you're addressing them through the tone of voice, through the gestures, through the eye contact, through the postures, all of these are critical in the nonverbal experience. Touch, through timing, the intensity of experience, the intensity of our interactions, All of those are what go into making the addressing at the state level. That's when we're dealing with the state level. When we can get into that space. When you can get into that non-threatening space, and do you know that scientists say that the state level is the most difficult level to access? No, it's not. It's not. It's one of the easiest levels to access, and that's why children don't get better, because we're always stressing them out, because we're always reinforcing the state level, because we're always accessing the state level, because when we're stressed, the state level is available. The state level is not the most difficult level to access. It's the easiest level to access. But you have to be able to slow down, and you have to be able to create an oxytocin opportunity, and you have to be able to focus on relationship, and you have to be able to create soothing interactions, regulated interactions. You have to be able to use eye contact. You have to be able to use tone of voice, gestures, timing, intensity, and you have to be able to bring oxytocin to the table, because that's when you create healing. That's when you create healing at the state level. Bam! I love teaching this class with you. I love sharing this information with you. I'm so honored. I'm so privileged to have you all joining me, and you give me this opportunity. You're giving me this opportunity to share with you something that I am passionate about. You are giving me this opportunity to share with you a message that I believe God wants us to hear. God wants us to know. God wants us to understand this. And you're giving me an opportunity to let that flow through me, and then for you to take it and implement it in your homes and with the other people that you encounter. It's such a blessing. I feel so grateful and blessed right now. I feel so grateful and blessed right now in this moment. I could just cry. I really could. I feel that alive, and I feel that enriched. And I'm just so thankful. And so I just want to share that with you all. Okay. There are 3 kinds of trauma: traumatic stress, shock trauma, and developmental trauma. This is the trauma that we are always going to be dealing with when it comes to adopted children, but a lot of times they've experienced both of these two. Traumatic stress is the physical, sexual, emotional abuse. It's the neglect. It's the stress that goes. It's ongoing. I have a friend recently. She was just sharing how an uncle who had sexually perpetrated many members of the family, herself included, had just recently passed. And on Facebook, someone had said, they wanted to make this tribute to him and plant all these trees and for all the people that he had touched. And she said, it's like the closet door just flew open. She said, my family has really, because no one had really talked about this. You know how those secrets get held and get stored. And she said that one post, she said it just opened the door. And that's traumatic stress. I mean, it's this ongoing stress. And then shock trauma. See, a lot of times, shock trauma is also involved in traumatic stress. So this is the freezing of the body. See, a lot of times when we're dealing with defiance, especially when you're dealing with defiance in regards to adopted children, to foster children, to children with trauma histories, you're also dealing with shock trauma. So what you're seeing as defiance a lot of times can be shock. You ask a child to do something and then they just freeze. It has absolutely nothing to do with defiance. I mean, that's another one of those words where, our linguistics and the fine points, the finer understandings, the nuances of how we think about things and the words we hear make such a difference. So there's oftentimes lots of traumatic stress and lots of shock in developmental trauma. Developmental trauma is any trauma that occurs during your developmental progression, during your developmental stages, and that's where we get developmentally arrested. That's why You're not dealing with your child at a cognitive level. You're not dealing with your child at a chronological level. You're dealing with your child at an emotional level. Where's your child at an emotional level? What are the behaviors they're exhibiting? What are the struggles that you're having right now? What are the challenges that your child is presenting? Where do those register on the developmental stage? Where is your child regressing to? Because your child is not acting like an 18-year-old. Your child is acting like a 2-year-old. Your child is acting like an infant. Your 10-year-old is not acting like a 10-year-old. Your 10-year-old is acting like a 2-year-old. You're not acting like a 40-year-old. You're acting like a 15-year-old, or you're acting like a 5-year-old. Where are you showing up on the developmental continuum? That becomes very important. Grasping that at that moment, being able to look at that as often as you can. Very, very important. You know what else? It's interesting because I have such a contrast with my two 10-year-olds. I have Marley, my 10-year-old, who is one of the most regulated children, and it's just regulated and loving and flexible and transitions. And then I have Donnie, who is dysregulated and does not like transition at all and talks nonstop all the time. It reminds me of my nephew's Elijah, who has his own trauma history. And so at any given moment with the two of them, I can have these huge contrasts, which just emotionally, it just challenges my ability to stay focused. And you think about parents who have 5 and 10 children. You think about how all those varying emotional presence, the emotional presence of all the children, how they're all different, and how in any given moment they can trigger something different. And I mean, when you're talking about parenting, more than one child, and so you go all the way up 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, I've worked with parents who actually had 11 children. I've got parents who have 19 children. You have got to be one of the most centered, present, focused, mindful parents that exist, because otherwise it's just going to be chaos. And otherwise everyone is going to be missing out. You're going to miss out on your own life, and they're going to miss out on having the nurturing and the care and the affection that they deserve from their parents. So it's just very important to keep that in mind. These are all unspoken traumatic events. You got medical trauma. See, these are the traumatic events that we don't talk about. These are the traumatic events that show up throughout life we don't think about, but these traumatic events all affect our ability to regulate. See, and I mentioned the coffee spill. Remember back, gosh, what was that? 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when the lady sued McDonald's because she had spilled coffee on herself, and the coffee was scalding hot, and it created all these issues. That is traumatic. I used to talk about this in my lectures all the time. We want to laugh about that woman's now probably, she a multimillionaire, but the reality is that lady may not actually be able to drink hot liquid anymore. She may have experienced a traumatic so great that could affect her ability, just like my nephew who can't get in even a warm bathtub. His baths used to be as a small child, they had to be cool. They had to be lukewarm. I mean, he did not like the thought of if it was moderately warm, it was hot to him. That's because he had experienced early trauma. So see, we don't really think about how these kinds of events, how a lot of times they play out in our lives, and you may not realize it. You may not remember these events. It's like I talked about the lady and the birds and the feathers and the trauma around the chicken. See, we forget about these kind of events, but these are unspoken traumatic events. And these are traumatic events common with regulatory difficulties. Every trauma is going to impact your regulation at some point. Now, I call these traumatic events common with regulatory difficulties. Where's my little pen at? There it is. Common with regulatory difficulties, period. See, I like to make that point. These are traumatic events common with regulatory difficulties, period. When you've experienced abuse, when you've experienced neglect, when you've experienced adoption or foster care, when you've experienced frequent moves, chronic pain, emotional absence, parental depression, when your needs have been left unmet, these are traumatic events that impact your regulatory ability. Period. You will have impaired regulatory ability from that point forward. From that point forward, you will have an impaired ability to regulate your emotions in day-to-day functioning. It's lifelong. You will have a lifelong regulatory impairment. I believe when we are talking about adopted children, I believe that adoption is an irreparable traumatic event. It is an irreparable traumatic event. And the best that we can do as adopted children, as we get older, is learn how to be flexible and mindful with our histories and who we are. And as parents, adoptive parents, I believe the best that adoptive parents can do is equip their adopted children with an understanding of themselves that plants the seeds so that as the adopted child gets older, as they age, as they progress, they will have an understanding of their own stress sensitivity and their own fearfulness. And that I believe that applies to every child. It applies to all of us as adults. I believe that that is a fundamental goal of parenting. That is a fundamental task for parenting, to equip our children with self-understanding, to equip our children to plant the seeds for some level of mindfulness. I believe when we do that, that will transform. That will transform our society. Because self-understanding is the most important understanding that exists. Now here's what I want you to understand. All of these events have one thing in common. They all occurred in the context of human relationships. And you know what that means? When you have experienced any of these events, all of these events occur, and these being some of the biggest ones, the most impactful, the most common. All of these events occur in the context of human relationships. And you know what that means? From that point forward, relationships are not safe. Literally, human interaction becomes not safe. Human interaction becomes mired with threat. Human interaction becomes mired with fear. It's huge. It's big. It's such a foundational understanding. Sometimes I just have to pause. I just have to pause. Emotional absence and parental depression. The problem with these is that they are unseen. And because they are unseen, we think they don't exist. However, these are the most common forms of traumas in our society, because they are the nonverbal. This is the energy. These are the things that allow cortisol to grow and exist. This is when oxytocin is absent. The emotional absence of parental depression. This is when most of us say, I didn't have any trauma as a child. I grew up in a great home. And you may have grown up in a great home, and I cannot take that away from you. And I will not take that away from you. I have no need to take that away from you, because you grew up in the home you grew up in, with the parents you grew up with, doing the best that they could. And I can guarantee you, I can promise you, it doesn't matter if there was any abuse, any trauma of any sort present, your parents were doing the best that they could do. If they could have done better, they would have done better. But if you grew up in the Leave It to Beaver home, I can tell you that oftentimes you dealt with emotional absence and parental depression. They are pervasive in our society. They are generational. It's cultural. It's in our DNA. It is in our DNA. We come from a history of overwhelmed people. We come from a history. We come from a history of very strong people. We come from a history of survivors. We come from a history of resilience. But in that strength is the trauma that we've experienced. And that strength is what leads to the challenges that we face. You know, for every negative, there's a greater positive. But when we forget about the presence of the negative, when we become unconscious of it, when we're not aware of it, then we fail to see how it dominates our existence. And it does. Couple of points. Children who've been adopted or have been in foster care have already experienced early trauma, just a separation from the biological figure. The break from the biological figure is traumatic. It disrupts the neurophysiology of the system. It's important to acknowledge the trauma the child has experienced so they can heal. It's important to emotionally connect and to tell that story. You know, not in a way to make the child feel ashamed of who they are, but in a way to help them understand who they are. That makes such a big difference. That made such a big difference in my life. Even though my parents didn't equip me with an understanding of my own stress sensitivity, my own fear, my own sense of shame, my own fear of rejection, my own fear of abandonment, even though they didn't equip me with that because they didn't understand it, they equipped me with an understanding of my adoption that helped me to be not ashamed of where I came from. It helped me to completely accept the fact that I was adopted. And that made a big difference in my life. It really helped my own self-esteem when it came to adoption. And for that reason, I didn't have a need to have any other parents than the parents that I had. And when I finally sought out my biological parents, it was just to have some framework of who I was, like the history that I came from, my roots. And that's the first thing I said to my biological mother when I reconnected with her, is I just want to understand my roots. I'd like to see people who look like me. That would be a really interesting thing. It was until I was in Dallas, Texas with my half-sister, my half-biological sister, that my biological family members, some biological family members from my father's side pulled up to get her. She had spent the weekend with me, and I saw people who looked like me, and it was freaky. It was weird. I'd never seen a car full of people that like mirrored me. It was weird, and we didn't even spend that much time together. I mean, they just picked her up and they drove off because it was late and that's not what we were planning on doing. But it was strange to see that, and I look forward to the time when I can have that experience again, that mirror of reflection of just who I am. But fundamentally, I was not seeking parents. I don't consider them my parents. I have my parents. My father passed away, and I love my mother to death. But what they did is they equipped me with an understanding of who I was and where I came from in a way where there was no shame around my adoption. Now, they couldn't help me with the other things, which would have been great, but guess what? Had they helped me with those things, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you right now. See, God has a purpose for all things. Every moment, every experience is in order for our growth, for our progress, for our movement, for our alignment, every opportunity. So what about emotional abuse? I talked about this. This is a slide that Bruce Perry uses in his presentations just to show the difference, the impact of emotional abuse alone on the brain. We don't see this. The difference between a normal brain and the difference between the size of a brain of a child of extreme neglect. And the thing is, the 2-3-year-olds can look exactly the same height, the same weight, the same color hair, eyes, everything. They could talk the same, but they're not the same. That is a very, very powerful slide. It took me showing that to a set of parents once before they really grasped, and they could really only grasp it for a short period of time because they couldn't make it a part of their paradigm because of their own challenges, because of their own struggles. They couldn't really accept that, but that was the struggle with their daughter. Did you know it's not considered to be a valid form of abuse because it can't be validated? You can't see it. Absolutely. So why, you ask? Because scientists say it cannot be empirically measured. Isn't that crazy? Absolutely. We know that emotional abuse can be as bad and sometimes worse than physical and sexual abuse. Neglect is considered to be the worst form of abuse because it impacts all the sensory pathways. When children come from orphanages, that neglect experience has affected all of their sensory pathways, all of them. And that is what has such a direct impact on the brain. And that's why we'll talk about, as we get into parenting principles, and we talk about even some therapy principles, of why you have to access all those sensory pathways to make the biggest difference. Alan Strofe says infants in well-regulated parental systems become effective self-regulators in the face of stress as young children separate from the caregiver. So that makes all the difference. When you've had that well-regulated parental system, when you've had that parent who's able to create that environment that's rich in oxytocin, it moves you forward in a way that children who haven't had those opportunities, they just don't have it. And when they don't have it, it just creates challenges. It creates challenges to the regulatory framework. And we want to be able to do that. We want to be able to create those opportunities for our children to experience regulation in the midst of their stress. We want to be able to create those opportunities for our children to experience oxytocin in the midst of their trauma, in the midst of their state level of the memory, in the midst of their behaviors, which is tied in to their motor memory, in the midst of their feelings, they're screaming, they're shouting, they're saying ugly things, which is tied into their emotional memory and their feelings. And then in the midst of their crazy, absolutely crazy and distorted thinking and the things that they say, which is tied into their cognitive level of memory. I hope today's class has been as rich for you as it has been for me. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you at our next class. Enjoy your weekend.